Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our part 2 of the School of Education's offering on equity-oriented assessment in an era of education recovery. I see the numbers growing, and we are so pleased to host you this afternoon as we navigate together ways in which we can work alongside one another as partners in education towards achieving equity-oriented assessment. So I see we are at 100 participants. Welcome everyone again. And just to let you all know, this is the second and final installment in a two-part series held by the School of Education to discuss a very pertinent area of focus, given the ongoing pandemic and the challenges that not only our education system has faced, but something that has proven to be a global upheaval of learning and assessment for all levels of the education landscape. So I'm Murella Sambucharan, and I'm going to be your guide this afternoon as we navigate together this second part of the University of the West Indies School of Education's webinar on equity-oriented assessment in an era of education recovery. So I want to thank all of you for coming out. I'm seeing we are at 108 participants. So thank you for giving of your time this afternoon. And I want to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues at the School of Education and the University of the West Indies, and the Ministry of Education personnel that are attending. We have educators at all the levels in our system. We have education consultants, local and regional, and to all our past and present students from the School of Education, welcome again. So I'm really excited for this afternoon, following my experience as an attendee in part 1, which was held only 2 days ago. Monday's focus was a thought-provoking experience. We had a variety of experts in the field, all aligned in one way or the other to the UE School of Education, and they all weighed in on that shift to recovery, innovation towards transformation, with that core focus on equity. With a true understanding of our Caribbean and our local context, we had experts such as Dr. Freddie James, who gave us some very useful strategies on education recovery, while our director, Professor Jerome Delisle, provided that deeper insight into ways in which we can change and shift our mindset on assessment towards more equity-oriented assessment. Our true champion for formative assessment, Dr. Carla Kronberg, inspired us all with her GPS analogy and how formative assessment is the way forward to provide a true understanding of where our students are and how we as classroom practitioners are going to move them to where they want to be or where we need them to be. Our reading specialist, Dr. Paulson Skerritt, showed us some revolutions in reading assessment and showcased that value of authentic reading assessments to address what will be the inevitable reading loss happening. And finally, and perhaps most critically, we gained insight into the value of psychoeducational assessment and the need for interventions to aid those who are already sub-threshold when it comes to learning. So today, this evening, and I'm checking the numbers, and so we're at 131, so welcome again. As we move into our part 2 of this two-part webinar, I'm quite certain that, just like me, you're all very geared up for an afternoon of stimulating discourse and what I hope to be active participation by you, the audience. So we encourage you to use the chat, to ask your questions, to leave your comments and suggestions on what is being presented. We want to hear from you. Similar to Monday, we hope to really engage with you, connect, share as we all move, hopefully hand in hand, towards finding ways to move Trinidad and Tobago towards equity-oriented assessments. So we're going to get started. And our first presenter comes from the School of Education, Mrs. Nalini Ramsawak Jodha, who is a lecturer in education in the teaching of mathematics at the School of Education. Through her preparation of teachers at the primary and secondary levels, she aids with teacher preparation, guiding them towards sound pedagogy and assessment practices. Her research interests include mathematics pedagogy and STEM education. Nalini is currently a PhD student in the field of measurement and evaluation and will undoubtedly continue to add value to the assessment landscape in Trinidad and Tobago. As I invite Nalini, I will let you know that she is presenting on employing instructionally sensitive large-scale assessments in mathematics. Does the SCA now measure up? So I hand you over to Nalini.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. You know, may have heard the phrase "be sensitive," and you know, it usually speaks to sensitivity, emotional sensitivity. Today, I want to sensitize you to instructional sensitivity. And as my opening slide suggests, there's a spectrum, there's a degree, it's a continuum from low to high. So instructional sensitivity, we want to be able to add to our repertoire. Okay, so we know that sometimes a lot of assumptions are made based on assessments about instructional content and quality. These assumptions we have to evaluate the degree of validity of these assumptions in terms of the interpretation and use of the assessment scores. So sometimes we might hear that, you know, higher scores may be associated with higher quality of instruction. This may not always be the case. There are so many other issues, things like opportunities to learn, characteristics of assessment items themselves, alignment of the assessment to the curriculum standards, test preparation. So many things as impact that relationship between instructional quality and student performance. So this instructional sensitivity provides a framework to help us interpret that link between instructional opportunity and performance in particular assessment items. Now, we have instructional sensitivity at the level of the items and at the level of the test. Now, not every item or test can be instructionally sensitive, but today we want to look at the SEA. Why is it important that it should be instructionally sensitive, in particular the mathematics component, and how can we help achieve that? So the quality of instruction and the effectiveness of educational reform cannot be evaluated without instructional sensitivity. What is instructional sensitivity? The psychometric capacity of tests, it's quite a mouthful, or single items of capturing the effects of teaching quality and the content of classroom instruction. So what is it that we seek? We seek a balanced, coherent, comprehensive assessment system, as Professor Delisle shared in his presentation 2 days ago. We want high quality assessment. We know that teaching, learning, and assessment are inextricably linked. We want assessment that targets higher order skills, critical abilities, uses internationally benchmarked standards, and we want valuable, authentic instructionally sensitive items that will be sensitive to the instruction students receive, where we can actually see a change in students' achievement scores based on the instruction that they receive. And what we want is equity-oriented assessment. We want to write tests for everyone without barriers, where students' latent abilities are able to be picked up. So large-scale assessment should provide information to feed back into teaching and learning to support instructional practice. Unfortunately, in our context, due to the high stakes nature of our public examinations, like the SEA, we sometimes have inaccurate inferences on instructional quality. And we have sampling of broad domains over extended periods of time. For example, the 2-year or more, because sometimes preparation starts earlier for SEA. And there's a lot of focus on achievement scores. And as Professor Delisle had spoken to marks. We need more information than marks. We need information that is going to help us improve instruction, that will then help students achieve better scores, equity-oriented assessment, all students. We also want information that will allow teachers, parents, and maybe even students themselves to be able to say where my child is and what can I do to help, right? And unless large-scale assessment provides that assistance with teaching and learning, then it is useless. Let's turn our lens to the SEA. It has a new format from 2019, and there's a strong focus on levels of thinking, knowing, lowest level, 40%, applying, which includes problem solving, another 40% of the test, and reasoning, which is the highest level, which is being able to formulate justifiable arguments that you can defend about your thinking, is reasoning, and being able to be critical and creative. And my colleague will talk about these transversal skills coming up. There are 3 sections in the paper. The first section has 1-mark questions, 20 items, then 2 to 3 mark questions, 20 items as well, and then 4-mark questions, right? I think there are 5 items. The SEA is a sensitive assessment, and there are consequences which are intended, such as placement, and unintended, such as teaching to the test, right? Or shrinking of the curriculum in order to teach to the test. So how can we improve the functioning of the SEA? We have to look at the item quality. We want items that can be deconstructed, high quality, complex items that teachers can deconstruct and use to help students develop complex thinking skills. So we don't want teaching to the test, but we want teaching of thinking skills. So one way in which we can do this, and I won't be able to show you the whole video probably, is to use something called a think aloud, right? So I'll draw your attention to certain things. Three areas, we'll see it again. 3-part problem solving model: analyze, plan and solve, and then execute and justify.
First, I'm going to analyze the problem. After reading the problem and visualizing and making a movie in my mind about what's happening in the story, what information do I know? Well, I know that there are 12 tables in the library, and then each table has 5 chairs. So that means one table has 5 chairs. That means
Okay, so what happens in a Think Aloud is that a teacher models for students the thinking processes that they go through when they are attempting to solve problems. And students are then encouraged to follow this model, to orate their thinking, and therefore help connect with how we can solve complex problems. This brings me to formative assessment. Formative assessment can aid with the coherence of high stakes testing. The classroom is often seen as a black box. We have inputs, we have the black box, and we have outputs, one of which is achievement scores in assessments. And we want to illuminate that black box a little bit. We want to put more emphasis on formative assessment using that GPS that Dr. Kronberg spoke about to help students understand how they can think through and therefore solve complex problems. And one dimension of teacher quality, which comes out of instructional sensitivity, is cognitive activation, which is where students are probed while they explain their thinking to defend, to explain. They are presented with conflicting ideas to help deepen their processing and their understanding of problems and how to solve them. So what's the way forward? It's purposefully not a straight road, right? It's a road that has many twists and turns. We are not debating SEA or not. We are looking at how can we help the SEA to function better. So first of all, we need to be the change that we want to see. So we need the people that possess the knowledge to share, like what we're doing through these webinars, to share knowledge, to facilitate and guide change. We need all content standards to be monitored in all subject areas, not just what is assessed in our high stakes public exams. We need teacher training in order to use items to develop thinking skills. We need high quality items. So therefore, we need training for test developers and item developers, and we need quality assurance of items that will help promote this complex thinking and deep thinking. We need clear guidelines for classroom assessment procedures, and we need support, and we need evidence that will help contribute to have validity arguments that will help us improve our SEA and other public exams. So we want to add instructional sensitivity to our repertoire. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a very insightful presentation, Mrs. Ramsawak Jodha. I mean, in your presentation, you addressed the need for instructional sensitivity in that ever popular topic, the SEA. And you said something that I think will stick with us all. You know, we need more information. We need more information than just marks. We want to be able to help our students improve their scores. We want information that's going to help us guide our parents. We want information to help guide teachers and administrators and key decision makers. And we thank you for giving us some very thought-provoking suggestions, because I mean, you know, you carved that way forward at the end of your presentation, and so we look forward to hearing more from you and from other presenters, and also from the audience on what was presented by Mrs. Nalini Ramsawak Jodha. So at this point, we are going to move into our second presentation, and this presenter, Miss Tracy Lucas, is a junior fellow in the Research, Evaluation and Outreach Unit at the School of Education at the UWI St. Augustine campus. She's also a PhD student whose study focuses on the development of 21st century competencies. namely creativity within the Trinidad and Tobago education system. So we really look forward to hearing her presentation as we learn about these transversal skills in her presentation entitled Rubrics, Exhibitions, and Projects, Tips on how to access transversal skills using the FSI model. I introduce you now to Ms. Tracy Lucas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's really good to see so many people out and willing to hear more about how we can build equity-oriented assessments. So as Mirella mentioned just now, my presentation is really focusing on how to assess transversal skills using what we call the FSI model for short, right? So let's start with a conversation. What are transversal skills? So transversal skills, we tend to use the terminology of 21st century skills or soft skills. These are skills that tend to be higher order thinking skills, which we heard about in the previous presentation. It also includes social and emotional skills. So around this very colorful circle that you see on the screen, it would include things like critical and innovative thinking skills, such as creativity, I'm biased, application skills, and it will also include intrapersonal and interpersonal skills, so how you speak with persons and how you even think about your own thinking. So these skills are not specifically related to any particular job or task or discipline, but rather they are skills that can be used in a wide variety of situations, work settings, and in everyday life. And as the world becomes more unpredictable, we need these skills more and more to be able to adapt to changes and to be able to lead more meaningful and productive lives. And many researchers have recognized this, and educational policies at international, regional, and local levels have been including these outcomes much more. So what we want to know, though, is how, if we are supposed to teach these skills in school, how do we know that they are actually learned? And so let's talk about learning for just 15 seconds or so. When we talk about learning, we are talking about the ability to think differently in solving real life problems and scenarios. We talk about knowledge. We talk about how you can use that knowledge, that's the skill, and how you understand knowledge. So that is how you can actually use and transfer that knowledge into new situations. So learning requires these mental processes of rehearsal so that things you learn move from short-term memory to longer-term memory. So you have to be able to use them, retrieve and use that information. And we're kind of accustomed to thinking like that for subjects, right? Geography, math, remember, use, regurgitate. But the same is true for higher order skills. We need to be able to learn them, not just learn what they are, but how we can use them. Now,
Lucas,
yes.
Sorry to disturb. Yes, we'd like you to put your show on full screen.
Oh, sure.
It's small. Yes, thank you.
No problem. Is that better?
Yes, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. Okay, so what we note is that traditionally, we tend to, sorry, I got a little thrown off guard with that. So let me go back a bit. Right, so we need to ensure that we are in 21st century skills, not just learning what they are, but how we can use them. Now, when we talk about learning in education, alignment is very important. Our curriculum, which is what we want to learn, needs to be aligned to our instruction, which is how we are taught, and our assessment, which is how we know that our students have learned what we want them to learn. But traditionally, this has been very subject-oriented, teacher-focused, and a bit rigid in terms of assessment. And we need now to shift so that we can elicit evidence that our students have actually learned these kinds of skills, these higher order skills, right? So we need instruction that is not just teacher-oriented, but student-centered and really engages them, keeps them interested and motivated. And we therefore need assessments that can pick up not just if they know these skills, but whether they can actually use them. So this is where the FSI model comes in. And if you were here in part 1, you might have gotten already an introduction to this. So I'm just going to go over this very quickly. The FSI model has several components. It pulls together different aspects of assessment, and basically it allows the enactment of holistic learning. So there are 4 components: the formative assessment, which allows in particular teacher, student, and peer feedback, which helps learning, and the performance of understanding and performance assessment, which allows students to engage in meaningful tasks, meaningful in that the context is relevant to them. The task is something that would be authentic or real world based. We also have the 21st century skills focus, where you are focusing on developing those transferable or transversal thinking skills. And we also have integration, which is where students can make deeper learning and connections, because you're not just focusing on one topic or one subject, but you can actually pull together different themes or different subjects or domains. So what do these assessments look like? So I'm going to share with you just 2 pieces of this clip, but I will also post this clip in the chat a bit later. So forgive me while I focus on the right spot.
The missions are some kind of disaster.
Sorry, I did forget to introduce this. So in this transversal skills, in this assessment, at a high school, students are being assessed in their mathematical skills. But what they've done is created this disaster relief mission where students become the air traffic controllers, and they are responding to crisis situations and being asked to use their mathematical skills and transversal skills to solve them. And if you're interested, what you can do is, as you see different transversal skills pop up, you can just list them in the chat and I'll get to see what you came up with a little earlier.
The missions are some kind of disaster.
I think it's that one.
An earthquake or a flood. Someone needs to get to them to rescue them. When they scan the code, that will take them to a wiki space that has the disaster described and what they need to do in order to rescue the people.
A hurricane hit oil rig situated on a platform off a 1,500-yard long sandy beach on the shore of Louisiana. From which end of the beach should the worker leave? Okay, so I labeled 1,500 as B, so then that's the side opposite the rig. That's angle side angle.
I think that's the law of sines.
I think you're right, because we have 2 angles.
Throughout the course,
6 was the forest fire in Oregon.
They did this correctly. Most people, I think their error is in not taking the bearing from north-south line.
All right, I'm done with all my calculations. If you guys need help.
We observe how well they are communicating with each other. We will not help them solve the problems. We're guiding them.
Think about how you calculate amplitude.
So it would be like 0 time minus 0 over 2, so it's actually 5.
Okay, so are you just, Morella, can you tell me quickly if you're seeing the screen properly?
Yes, so I just think your Zoom taskbar might be blocking the top of your screen. So if you shift it, it should be fine.
Okay. Okay, so I'll try to shift it out of the way of anything important in the future. Okay, so I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go as quickly as possible now. So what are some tips we can use to assess transversal skills, these higher order thinking, emotional, and social skills? The first thing is that we need to use integrated tasks, authentic integrated tasks, as opportunities to engage students in these skills. What is authentic? Authentic means that students are allowed to demonstrate what they can do, and these are usually in tasks that mimic real-world situations that are complex, and therefore there are no simple solutions. So they really have to think things through and usually work together to work things out. Secondly, integration allows us to, as I mentioned earlier, to pull things together. So there are different levels of integration of pulling different themes together or different subjects together, including fusion, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary integration. The second tip is that we need to facilitate teacher, peer, and student feedback to promote learning and transversal skills. So you would have heard about formative assessment. And in formative assessment, the three most important questions that the student has to ask themselves is, where am I going? How do I get there? And where am I? So by reiterating through this process, they're able to see where they have to be, what the success criteria is. And usually this would be shared by the teacher, who clarifies and facilitates their understanding of what their learning objective is. By asking themselves, how do I get there? They can figure out what strategies they can use, engage in different and again, higher order thinking skills, even engage in peer assessment, where they can learn from each other how to get where they are going. So these are really critical strategies in facilitating formative assessment. And third of all, rubrics are incredibly important measures and tools that we use when we're looking at transversal skills. So perhaps one of the transversal skills that you might have recognized that they use in the video is maybe a little bit of creativity, reasoning, etc. So rubrics are scoring scales that are used to assess performance along a defined set of criteria. So again, I have to admit my bias. Here's a piece of a rubric for creativity that includes curiosity, and there's a description of what exemplary curiosity looks like. I am intrigued by novel elements and ideas, and I actively seek them out. And it also tells you what a novice curious student is. I hardly ever wonder about ideas and things. So by being able to figure out where they are along this continuum, and by seeing where they want to go or they need to be, they can see the gap and then work towards closing that gap with the guidance of their teachers and their peers. Lastly, in addition to performance assessments or problem-based learning, like you would have seen in the video, there are also different opportunities for authentic learning. This includes things like portfolios and exhibitions. So just very briefly to tell you about exhibitions, they're public demonstrations of mastery, and they usually happen at culminating moments like the end of a term or transitioning from one year group to another, and it requires students to speak publicly, use evidence, present engaging and visual displays. I wouldn't be able to go through this example now, but it does ask students to create a virtual museum to show their understanding of migration patterns in ancient Eastern societies and African societies. So second to last is why we assess transversal skills. It is because this will help us understand how we are progressing to the world we want to see by fostering students who are global citizens. Secondly, it allows us to give feedback, again, to those three questions: where am I going, and how I can get there, and facilitates learning. And lastly, it allows us to monitor where we are in terms of our education system. So how do we do this? Well, the same 21st century skills that we are asking and we are hoping to foster in our students are the same that we need as educators and perhaps even policymakers. We need imagination. We need to be able to plan. We need to take risks. We need to collaborate. We need to collaborate. We need to collaborate, and we also need to reflect. And this will help us to foster the kinds of global citizens that we want to see. So that brings us to the end of my presentation, and I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Lucas. I am sure all of us here learned quite a lot on aiding our students to make those deeper connections by assessing transversal skills. And, you gave us some quite good tips in terms of using authentic integrative tasks and for us to facilitate feedback mechanisms using those very powerful rubrics, and of course exhibitions as a key way of having students display what they understand. I think I particularly liked what you said at the end in terms of getting us to understand what assessing these transversal skills require, because it means we have to consider the imagination, bringing out, honing in on their imagination. We need to plan. Of course, we need to allow them, and we need to take risks as well as students. And that collaboration was key that you mentioned. And of course, the need for us all as practitioners, and then of course, the encouraging our students, the need to reflect. So thanks. And I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion on that coming up. And so we're moving right along into our virtual panel, and I'm really excited about that because on Monday there was a lot of discussion about formative assessment, and what we have here in our panel, led by our director, Professor Jerome Delisle, and Dr. Carla Kronberg, lecturer in the School of Education, would be a team of students who have used the FSI model for classroom assessment. And so they're going to share their experience with us. And, I think it's going to allow us to gain insight from actual examples of applying this model and ways in which we too can think about our own practice and find ways on really honing in on that formative assessment, as well as integrating all of these skills, including the 21st century skills, into our teaching and learning. So the panel is led by Professor Jerome Delisle, who is our director at this point in time at the School of Education. He's a professor of educational leadership at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. His core areas of specialization include training, regarding educational measurement, assessment, and evaluation. And he is definitely no stranger to the world of assessment locally, regionally, and internationally. And we also have joining us again Dr. Carla Kronberg, who is a lecturer and head of the assessment committee at the School of Education. And she has been at the University of the West Indies more recently, but comes with over 20 years of experience as an educator within the secondary school system. And her research interests include teachers' implementation and use of formative assessment activities in their classroom, and she's our internal champion for formative assessment. And so we look forward to hearing what her students have to say. And so joining us as students who would have undergone training at the School of Education, we have Ms. Patricia Claxton, who has over 20 years of teaching experience across several subjects at the secondary school level. Her goals include working to improve the quality of education in Trinidad and Tobago, and in this vein, she has served in several areas of the education system, including the Ministry of Education Textbook Review Committee, the CXC Examinations Review Team, as well as a content writer for Notes Master. She holds a master's in education and is currently pursuing her PhD in educational assessment. We are also joined by Ms. Rena Braffett Cummings, who has been teaching for 16 years. And she has been an assistant examiner for CAPE for 5 years and has served as a head of department in English and a dean. Mrs. Braffett Cummings is very passionate about teaching and learning, and she decided to pursue the field of education a little bit more with a very strong commitment to improving pedagogical needs. She holds a master's in education with a concentration in curriculum and lifelong learning, providing opportunities to enhance The learning of those in her care is her goal. She's currently pursuing a PhD in education in the area of formative assessment. Ms. Nicole Mark also joins the panel, and she has been an educator for the past 13 years. And she is also a graduate of the University of the West Indies, and she holds a Bachelor of Science in Geography, a Master's in Education, and she too is currently pursuing her PhD. Nicola's research interests involve geography education, classroom assessment, measurement, and evaluation. And so together with their lecturers, Professor Jerome Delisle and Dr. Carla Kronberg, we look forward to a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion on the FPSI model, a classroom assessment model. I hand over to the conveners of the panel, Professor Jerome Delisle and Dr. Carla Kronberg.
Sorry, yeah. I know what you're saying, that UE is the great ivory tower, and they're just saying that, but they have never done it. I'm going to show that you're wrong today, and you're going to actually see persons who have used formative assessment plus effectively. This model is the model that we developed in 2016. When we developed it, I remember it quite well. Very depressed I was in Scotland, thinking about the Scottish system is very good in terms of people who are involved in education. I'm saying here I'm in Trinidad and you're trying so hard and nothing ever changes. So we put together the best ideas from the US, from England, from Singapore, and Scotland. And we created the FSI model, FPSI, and that's all you need to know as you listen to the FSI model in action. We start with, good, Nicola.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, again. I was actually introduced to the FPSI model, the FSI model, about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, I've implemented the FSI model at different intensities over the last 5 years. And most recent, I would have done so in a Form 2 geography classroom, in an all-male, all-boys geography classroom, where the task they had to design a web page or a website to educate their classmates about and the wider public about the Caribbean Sea. So we would have explored issues related to what are the benefits offered by the Caribbean Sea, what are some of the environmental conflicts, and even issues surrounding sustainability. Now, my core motivation actually for implementing the FSI model in this particular class was that I found that the boys were too dependent on me. They were constantly looking to me for all the answers. Now, I would have taught them at the Form 1 level for social studies. And I mean, I had the experience where these boys are very articulate. They were very expressive. They were very versed in terms of their researches, because they would come back and say, oh, miss, I found this and I found that. But after all of that discussion, it came back to, so miss, when you put in the notes up for us. So miss, what do you think when you're giving us the notes? And I recognize that despite all their attributes, they still, for some reason, would not let go of me. So essentially, my core motivation for implementing the FSI model was to encourage greater self and peer reflection and evaluation in the class. Now, some of the things that I was challenged by was that it was during the pandemic, because my previous iterations were like face-to-face. I did experience parental and administrative pushback. And, I kept asking myself, okay, ensuring that making sure that I'm effective in terms of this online implementation of this FSI model. So what I can say is that the success for me lies in the fact that I am seeing a growing collective ownership for each other's views and each other's strengths and weaknesses. I mean, throughout the implementation of the project, care was, I had to ensure that they kept going, sending them back to the rubric. Okay, what do you think? What do you perceive? Having them evaluate each other's concerns, have them evaluate each other's contributions. So for me, that was the highlight of it. And even until today, the boys will still say, well, miss, when we get in another project. And that collective responsibility for each other, as well as for themselves, that, how to say, that growing participation, that responsibility for their own learning is what was the highlight for me for implementing this model. And that is me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. So my name is Patricia Claxton, and I'm really happy to be here to give my experience of implementing the FSI model in a geography classroom. So in this particular instance, we looked at population studies, and having already done some background work about the relevance of population studies to issues of the environment and sustainability and social interactions, they were given a project to create a documentary, in the role of demographers, to look at a particular urban area of their choice and to come up with some benefits and challenges of urban population growth, as well as solutions to potential issues. Now, the thing about the FSI model, we can always give projects. As teachers, we have all given projects and we have all given activities that might elicit some of these strategies, some of these skills. However, with some of the best practices coming together in this model, what we found is that, it created an environment of real meaningful and deep learning. So for me, what were the highlights? One, I had never co-constructed a rubric with students. It's just a given that you give an assignment, you give them the criteria, or sometimes as teachers, we don't. But they have an idea of, okay, this is good, this is not good. But to actually sit down and elicit from them, okay, so you are going to do a research, you're going to do a documentary. What are some of the attributes of a good documentary? And it was quite interesting that we find that students can come up with a lot of these things on their own. And together we built the rubric, we built the criteria for marking. And with that, they took ownership of their learning. And by the way, it's also a boys' school, very highly competitive environment, students do well. And this is not something that they are used to. They are used to, miss, you just give us the work. Is this the answer? Okay, what's the mark? Where did I lose a mark? And the conversation in the class changed with this sort of implementation. And as they worked together, they had to rely on different strengths, because it's not just about cram and regurgitate information or just go download something from the internet, give it back to me. They had to go to a particular area. They had specific things to do. They had to work with each other, and some were academically stronger than others. And I found that they began to actually work with each other rather than compete with each other. So a lot of this social and emotional learning I found happened with the implementation of this project. So those were the two highlights for me. I mean, it's a really good model. It is very time consuming, yes. It can have pushback, yes, when students are competitive and they are concerned about examinations and finishing syllabus, but it is worth it in the end. And I would recommend this to any educator that is willing to try something new. So that was my bit, and I really hope it would have helped sharing my experience, and thank you once again.
Hi, good day. This is Rena. I'm an English teacher. I teach English B at all girls school. and I implemented the FSI, and I've been implementing the FSI since 2017. And the learning is exponential. We talk about equity, but this model really brings everybody at the same place. It brings everybody at the same stage. It helps teachers to learn from students. It helps teachers to engineer instruction to suit our learners. And the big idea in my curriculum is cultural diversity. And so the theme of cultural identity fell naturally in, teaching students about the representation of women in Caribbean folklore, like the Sukuni and so on, right? So one of the major highlights for me was the ability of the model to facilitate that cross-curricular integrated deep learning. Children were able to use learning from different disciplines like CVQ, cosmetology. They were able to bring in history. They were able to bring in theater arts, into the kinds of assessments that, they did, like videography and drawings and so on. So that really, it made even like the weakest students, because of the feedback, like students might get like 14 out of 30, but by the end, you're sure they're getting 27 out of 30 by the end. And it really built the confidence of the girls. And why? Because the learning is intentional and it is fun. And this is where learning is, formative assessment. Think of fun. It may be difficult to implement, at the beginning, but trust me, it's like driving. You just mash gas and you go on, so you'll get the hang of it. And it really is, mind blowing for me as a teacher in an all girls school with, students of different abilities. And this is my 2 cents. Thank you.
These are wonderful champions. What do you say? Yes, you hear me, Tara? You hearing me?
I am hearing you, Prof.
Yes, I'm saying that these are some wonderful champions of formative assessment and performance assessment. What do you say?
I do say so. If we think about last session we had on Monday, Dr. James talked about optimal performance, and I think that they highlighted that in their presentation. They not only took up your challenge to do assessment differently, but just the co-construction of knowledge that Pat talked about, which allowed students to share power in the classroom. And Nicola talked about empowering her students to engage in critical thinking, to let go of her. And Reina talked about the fact that the FPSI allowed for that integrated learning and brought in what the kids loved and made them excited about learning. Yes, amazing.
You know why I said that about they're all champions? Because in Trinidad we tend to focus on one person. And I regret saying that, yes, well, I designed the model, but it's not about me. I can't change Trinidad and Tobago. It's all of us. So you've come in here, with that excellent page that you have from Simon Fraser, and you've made a difference. And then we have these young women and more, and they have decided that they're going to spend their young years involved with PhD work, and we've designed courses, new courses that we've never done before, that maybe you have given us a little more support for, measurement that, you had to pay so much to get abroad. And as we build that capacity together, all of us, we can move forward. I think that's a lesson that we want to share with the audience here. Now, this is a theory of action. It's saying that the FSI has all of these good things packed together, like in a pilau. So it's a pilau with perhaps tree meats and pigeon peas and coconut. So you have the formative assessment, which is powerful, probably the most powerful vehicle, but the performance assessment. And one day, hopefully, when I retire, I'll be able to study this. But performance assessment can be very powerful in our system. I remember, for example, Rena's study, and I think that Rena had some very high objective. But I think her girls are so bright, and by performing the activity, they were actually able to reflect a little more about, well, why were women portrayed like that? Now, I've never told her this, but I did read, I mean, when she submitted the work, it was like, wow, so big. I hope it's a little smaller in the future, so many years ago. Of course, you have the 21st century skills, which Tracy talked about. Those are important skills relating to each other. That's critical in the society that Trinidadians hope to build. And of course, the integrated learning, well, the PCR was a big thing then, and we understand that you have to put the subjects together. So you want to close off with the last slide, and then we're out of here. Tala.
So what I particularly like about this model is that it can adapt to the environment of the classroom. And we know that each classroom has a unique environment. And so the model where you could look at what your students need and integrate the curriculum, you can ask them to perform, and you could develop different 21st century skills, and the formative assessment is adapted to each child. It allows for that kind of optimal performance that we want in recovery. So it's a great model to try in your classroom. Yes, there can be challenges, as our teachers mentioned, but it is worth it. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kronberg, Professor Delisle, Rena, Nicola, Ms. Paxton. You know, that was really an engaging kind of, discussion. And I'm even seeing in the chat here, the panel discussion is really wonderful. We have persons asking to learn more about the model. So you all have definitely inspired a lot of thought, by giving us that insight and connecting the classroom experience with students, the PhD students who, as Prof described, are the champions for the FSI model. And I think hearing about the very positive aspects of the experiences, and these are very real implementation examples that are being given here. The terms that they use terms like deep learning, cross-curricular learning, integration, collaboration. I think learning that is intentional struck me, and most critically perhaps the way it ended, where we looked at the fact that because of the potential to be adaptable, this model helps with aiding and supporting students who may have different learning preferences. So I think we are well on our way to what Dr. Freddie James would have started us off all with that transformation through innovation. And so we are really transforming classroom experiences by using that FSI model. And so now we are going to continue, and this has really been exciting thus far. I'm seeing the comments coming in, and so we're going to hear more, and we're going to have our director come back in again, Professor Jerome Delisle, who is our director at the School of Education, and he is joined now by Dr. Nisha Harry. And Dr. Nisha Harry is a lecturer at the School of Education in the area of curriculum studies and education. And she also coordinates the research methods course, qualitative, and the Masters of Education program in curriculum. Dr. Harry is the chair of the School of Education's Curriculum Committee, and she has research interests which include educational change, curriculum development, design and implementation, and cross-disciplinary studies. And we know, again, of course, our Professor Jerome Delisle, his core specializations include educational measurement, assessment, and evaluation. And so we are going to hear from them as they discuss modeling formative assessment change, the emerging role of PLCs, professional learning communities, for professional learning and teacher change. So I hand over to Professor Delisle and Dr. Harry at this point.
Thank you, Chair. We're just going to share, and let's hope I share well. Everything has been going good so far, but you know, something must go bad. So let's hope something goes bad. That'll be so exciting, right? You don't wish anything goes bad? No, I know you're seeing my notes. I will just duplicate the slides now, and we're good to go. So what an opportunity it is for us, Nisha and myself, to share. We've been doing some work on another Caribbean island, and it's exciting to look at how we make change happen. Share with me as we share this presentation together. Yes. Change doesn't happen in the minds of a minister in a university lecture room where we just talk until everybody there. It happens in the minds and the hearts and the wills of people. To change minds, you have to change knowledge, but that's not enough. You have to provide the motivation and you have to empower people in order to change wills. You think people are blank slates? You know people are not blank slates. They already have what is in mind. So when you come and tell them you need to do that, I'm not going to say anything political. They say no, 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 and then they march against you. So open mind, open heart, open will. Whatever you think I said, you can make that assumption. I said nothing like that. Misconceptions. That is what rules the world, and that is what stops people from changing. So let's deal with some misconceptions. Formative assessment is not continuous assessment. Stop saying that. The continuous assessment component, I didn't design that. Of course, I will always come in and help. All governments want this education, but I have nothing to do with that. That is not formative assessment. The government in 2007, 2009 would have done also a whole evaluation on it. Unfortunately, I was the consultant there. It's not. It does not need to be formative. Scoring people marks down, so they get 10 this week. Oh, and they get 20. Or they get 10 again. Or they get 20. That's not going to help anybody. And Nisha, what do you think about this classroom? Good? Unmute, Nisha.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. And if we look at this picture, what do we deserve? You know, is it the best way to learn? What really takes precedence in a classroom like this? The cultivation of the rational mind, mastery of facts, and the authoritarian role of the teacher. Think about it. It's traditional teaching, didactic, where rote learning takes precedence. So it is more of a question and answer session where some students are disengaged and are not making any sense of what is being taught. Take, for instance, the boy. He seems to be more interested in the video person. And it reminds me a lot, I don't know if you all know this movie, Matilda, where Miss Trunchbull is the authoritarian figure in the classroom and the only source of knowledge. Students are passive and must come up with one correct answer. And they are given, you know, they are not given that feedback that we talk about in the FSI model, all right, throughout the teaching learning process. In contrast, we know that authentic formative assessment practice emphasizes feedback and encourages co-construction with teachers and peers. So it's really more a perennialist version of education, all right, where knowledge seems to be absolute and has stood the test of time, where, you know, there's little attempt to adapt the curriculum to students' needs and interests. It's one way with the teacher, the textbook, they both seem to be the sources of authority. And, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, were you educated, or are you educating children and students through a curriculum that is heavy perennialist in its philosophy? You know, so that some of us, that would have happened. And you may be able to identify with the picture all too well. You know, it encompasses, you know, what Charles Darwin would have written in his experience of teaching and learning. You know, and I quote, you know, he said, "I'm turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions," where, of course, the best approach to schooling then, and you know, for some of us, perhaps, let's hope not, is to fill the minds of students with information from a wealth of precious sources in the ancient and modern world. And if we turn to the next slide, Professor Delay, Jean-Marc Couty, you know, and his image really is really depicting what he thought then education would look like, you know, and there are many interpretations of his at school image. One interpretation would be that students are depicted, as we clearly see, as passive recipients of truths, and that the teachers are they are in the roles of deliverers of these truths. You know, it is like a type of classical model of education where a teacher can input content into a machine. And of course, unlike the, you know, the excellent examples of teaching and learning that we saw with Nicola Mack, Miss Nicola Mack and Miss Brathwaite and others, you know, so that, you know, perhaps, you know, Jean-Marc Couty was insightful, you know, in his foresight then to realize that, you know, educators were lacking in both skill and knowledge about educational practice and effective pedagogy. A depiction, you know, he showed that where the teaching and learning process is a mind-numbing brainwashing of students with facts and with content chosen by an expert. You know, and we have, you know, if we add to that in the local context, and in his own way, Carl Campbell in Colony and Nation would have said that the curriculum and how we do assessment is really always bookish and testing, you know, where subjects were studied from only books as opposed to an integration, you know, of books, of students' environmental experiences and interests. Exactly what the FSI model was trying to show you, and Ms. Tracy Lucas, in terms of those transversal skills. So that, you know, you don't want the classroom scenario to be a scene like, you know, I don't know if you all like literature, but in Lakshmi Prasad's novel, Butterfly in the Wind, where, you know, she discussed the importance placed on mental arithmetic and just getting the correct answers without ongoing feedback from teachers and peers. And she showed the pain and the trauma of that protagonist. And I quote just a few lines. "Mental arithmetic in particular was a traumatic experience for the class. Pens and pencils down, sit up was the first command. The problem was given. There were 2 taps. One is filling a tank, the other is emptying it. How long would it take to fill the tank? The length, width, and height of the tank were given, together with the rate of flows for each tap. If you got less than half the sums right, you were given 2 strokes." So absent from that scenario was constructive, you know, that type of feedback from either the teacher or peers or both. Students were therefore not given the opportunity to review their work and improve particular aspects prior to moving on to the next. And if we look at the following slide, where we talk about, you know, constructivist learning, we need to shift then to progressivist philosophy of education that embraces that constructivist learning, you know, where the teacher, of course, is a facilitator, teaching is student-centered, the teacher is a guide, where students are taught exactly what Ms. Tracy Lucas spoke about, the 21st century skills, how to think, not what to think, where we focus on the learner rather than the subject, you know, and where, and I thought it was such a beautiful example with Miss Nicola Mack, where she used the FSI model in her geography classroom in an urban school, and the successes where we see a movement towards that constructivist learning, where, you know, some of her successes were ownership of learning, active participation in the assessment process, both self and peer, reduced perception that the teacher's voice is all that matters. And I pass you on to Professor Delay to go in depth with constructivist learning.
Thank you so much. I'll just share this picture for a while. Of course, this picture is from the UTT. This picture is very important because I wrote an article in maybe 2015 for the top assessment journal, and one of the originators of formative assessment, Paul Black, in looking at what I talked about in terms of our original continuous assessment, the CAP, he reminded us, all of us, that formative assessment is not just tutor feedback, as you're seeing here. And we don't even give enough of that, but you see how he's working with the kids. Look in the back, and you will see peers working together. And apart from that, you have self-assessment. So we have a way to go. It's not just the tutor feedback and the tutor working with students, but also the peer and self-assessment is what we need. And we won't go into this, but there's a whole process that's occurring when that happens, in which the student is learning to be self-regulated. And when we were having the recently the consultations, and I know the homeschooling association was very powerful in their voices, and I was partially homeschooled. In homeschooling, that's what it is. What we're able to do is work on our own to make sense of meaning, but that could be done with good teaching in a school. Let me pray for that, right? But this is very complex. Serena says she wants to do that. Rena is on her own. But we think that not only do you have co-construction, but you have a process called co-regulation, where I am kind of working through the criteria and the person who is being assessed working through. And both of us, when we're able to work in sync, in symphony, we get magic. Misconception number 2. Traditional teaching is not explicitly formative. That's something that is quite clear. I think Shamla did well in discussing that. So let's talk about what works successfully. We've been experimenting. Now we know worldwide formative assessment doesn't take place quickly and automatically. Having said that, there's a big program going on in Africa now. Please, in the Caribbean, about my concerns only with Trinidad. Don't let me say that. We need to get into it. PLCs are fundamental. Action research is fundamental, and they both work together in transformative learning. We've been experimenting with this idea, I and Carla, and we have looking at a model called LUR, that first people have to learn the different techniques, and that involves sense making. Why do I do this? And that's why you saw the PhD students were so excellent, and then they have to unlearn what they did before, and that involves planning. That involves a structural framework like the FSI, and they have to see good practice. We use a lot of videos, lots of videos. Tracy tried, but if we just give you videos one day, we'll do that, but maybe in 2024. And then they have to relearn. In other words, they have to go out and counter, go in your school and do it. You know, we like just to say, oh yes, I learned that. And then we go home and we do the same thing. That's not about it. We have to relearn. This is a picture from our class, and this is about PLCs and action research. You want to add something there, Nisha?
Yes, Prof. I would just say that for teachers to change, practice and embrace formative assessment, professional learning is important. Moreover, school-based professional learning communities that include teacher teams are crucial. So PLCs then, what it does, it provides, it provides an approach where groups of teachers work together collaboratively at the school, or it could even be at a cluster level to improve, new practices, in this case, formative assessment, so that the PLCs, or what we call professional learning communities, really represent an ongoing process in which educators work together in recurring cycles of collective inquiry and action research. So that, these include elements such as reflective dialogue, focusing on student learning, interaction among teacher colleagues, collaboration, and very important, shared values and norms. All right, and furthermore, it's very important that PLCs, you have, in terms of advanced systems, you have professional learning. It would normally combine, as Professor Delay stated in a few lectures, PLCs and collaborative action research, so that this collaborative action research really involves a systematic process of examining the evidence, all right? So that the data can be analyzed and done, by action researchers, but it's more powerful when it is done by the group of people who are invested in the outcome. Back to you, Professor Delay.
Thank you so much. And that is it. We look forward to the future, and we look forward to you trying out some of these things. And by the way, before you say you have PLCs in Trinidad, you don't have any PLCs. When we have groups, you have committees, but you don't have PLCs. I'm sorry to be so negative, but let's move on.
Thank you very much, Professor Delisle, Dr. Harry. I think it, apart from it being a food for thought, I think it helps us reshape our understanding of what a professional learning community really entails. And, we see that true PLCs can be very powerful, and utilizing some of what you all would have mentioned in terms of really moving towards having constructivist change occur in teaching and learning, and the entire learn, unlearn, relearn that you examine, and the need for us as practitioners to really move towards relearning, as well as that the need for collaborative action research to make decisions, but not only make decisions within our own class, but use the collaboration with other persons through PLCs that can really aid us in changing things, in modeling also that formative assessment change that you all presented on. So thank you for that invigorating discussion, both of you. So now we're moving into our final presentation for this evening, and I am really excited to present our moderator from Monday, Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh, and alongside him this evening will be Dr. Sharon Jagannath. And Dr. Sharon Jacqueline Jagannath is a lecturer and coordinator of the postgraduate diploma in education at the School of Education, and she has worked as an educator since 1997 and has served in the secondary and tertiary levels in our country, and continues to contribute to all levels of our national educational landscape, because she helps primary school and secondary school teachers with their classroom practice, and like all other presenters here, really pushes them towards making sound data-driven decisions through action research and facilitating sound assessment practices, and really exemplifying these in her teaching and learning. Her qualifications and extensive experience undoubtedly makes her very well positioned to present on the joint presentation, Finding That Way Forward for Education Recovery. And she is joined by our very own Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh, who is also a lecturer in the teaching of English at the School of Education, UWI St. Augustine campus. A former coordinator of the postgraduate diploma in education, his contribution towards preparing educators at all levels of our system is noteworthy. His preparation of education and educators in the classroom, with their delivery, with their assessment practice, with action research, also makes his contribution towards this evening's discussion very noteworthy and very relevant. And so I also want to add, apart from his range of expertise as a teacher educator, he has a passion for research, and his interest is in the teaching of writing at the elementary and secondary school levels. And so I now introduce my colleagues, Dr. Krishna Sunarayan Singh and Dr. Sharon Jagannath, to take the floor, virtual floor.
Thanks, Mirella.
Right. So, thank you, Chair.
Krishna, I've sent the request to give you control, okay?
Right. Okay, so thank you again for that introduction, dear Mirella. I almost didn't recognize myself after that introduction. Well, thank you for your kindness and your kind introduction. So, Dr. Jagannath, whose middle name I apparently just found out, we are presenting on what is the way forward for education recovery, a new vision for creating deeper learning in the Trinidad and Tobago classroom. So I'm the top name there, and the other person whose middle name we found out just now will join me in a little while. So we're looking at, pardon me. Alrighty, Sharon, I don't seem to be able to move the slides yet. Oh yes, okay, we're moving. So just to kind of contextualize a bit and remind us that for the last 2 years, since March 2020, right, fateful Monday, school shut down throughout the country. And in the 2 years since then, basically only the exam classes have been back out in primary and secondary school. Everybody else, you've had online teaching, you've been taught through packages, or in some cases, you've been riding a bicycle all over the village, and you have not had any contact with teachers at all. So what's going to happen in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months, when everybody is supposed to come back into school? Well, the thing is that Belaina and Hattie tell us that children will learn best, and the fact is that they will succeed when they are engaged. When they engage, when they're learning, when they're enjoying their experience in school and they're enjoying what it is they're exploring with teachers, that's when they will learn best and they will succeed. And teachers know that, okay? Teachers are aware of that. But the problem is that in the last 2 years, we have lost so much. There is so much work to quote unquote cover that teachers may be in a mode mentally where they feel they have to turn the clock back or stop the clock. So any teacher listening today or not listening today might be bewildered and say, well, what am I to do? I mean, what's happening here? I know they will learn if I engage them, but I have all of this content to deliver. I have a syllabus. All subjects have a syllabus. And if I'm a primary teacher, then I'm teaching all the subjects. If I'm a teacher in a secondary school, I have to teach my content, and it is a big amount of work to do. So unfortunately, it is possible that what's going to happen is that, and this is maybe a worst case scenario, it is possible we could end up with cram school. You know what is cram school? Cram school is where the teacher thinks that there is so much to do in so little time that the teacher pours gallons and gallons and gallons, millions of gallons or liters, if any metric system, down the children's brains because they have a syllabus to cover. All right? So the question then that could be asked is, well, what kind of learning is happening then? So I just need to pause because Sharon, my screen isn't working. So I would prefer if you can just, you can control it and move the
Can I
slides.
forward it?
Yeah. All right. So the thing is that what we really want, right, is that we really want a situation where you see that boy with the notebook there and the pencil. We want that. That is engagement. That is a child thinking about something that the teacher has told them in class. We want that where that is happening. We want where the children are discussing and engaging. All right. So next slide. So the thing is that one of the problems we face is that Sharon, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so that's what we want. We want those images of engagement in our schools. That's really what we want. Okay. Problem you see though is that, pardon, it's not just the subject matter content that's been affected since school closed, right? It's also the fact that the cognitive skills for engaging the social world and the physical world through the content that we're teaching the children, that has also been lost. So it's a case where missed schooling is not just missed subject content. It's the missed opportunities now for children to engage with the subject matter experts, with the teachers who can help them to become curious, who can feed your curiosity, who can help them to inquire. That is the biggest casualty of not going to school. Because you can read a book on your own, but the thing is that you need some guidance and you need to have your curiosity sparked. You need to get help along the way to know when you are on track. So that is perhaps the biggest casualty we're talking about here. And that's where formative assessment is such an excellent means for nurturing student inquiry and feeding children's curiosity. So the thing is that if we desire curiosity-driven classrooms, which is what we say we want, with increasingly self-directed learners, then we can't only rely on high-stakes tests to tell us whether the students have learned or they haven't learned. What we want is evidence that the curiosity is being aroused, imagination is being kindled, right? So what we want, I think, if you look back at the FSI experiments that were done and which were presented in the panel, and which I think we were all in awe of, the fact is that we saw children being able to pose pertinent questions. They learned how to find answers to questions, to find relevant concepts that they could use to answer the questions. They learned how to make inferences and draw conclusions and all of those kinds of skills, okay? So we have to remember always, people, that knowledge in the subjects that we teach in school, that kind of knowledge that's in the textbook came because people wanted to answer they asked big questions and they wanted answers for those questions, okay? So there was a thirst for knowledge, and this led people into asking those kinds of questions. So what we have to do, as you saw in the FSI model, is that we have to design instruction that will engage students in what I'm calling poking and prodding big, interesting questions. Poking and prodding, like the whole thing about the hypersphere, getting children to as you saw before, getting children to talk about the way that women are depicted in literature. So that is you're poking them, you're prodding them. You're not just feeding them information, but you're getting them to think about these things, all right? So an example of a big question you see on the screen is, are plastics a necessary evil? If I pursue a big question like that, I could look at the content information from the subjects. I could learn different ways of thinking and talking about an issue because it comes from different subjects have different ways of talking about the world, right? So I could learn different ways of thinking and talking about an issue. I could then I can acquire core skills that, like, for example, being able to know how to go about collecting the information, knowing how to summarize things. That is a transferable skill across disciplines. And I eventually become skilled at reading and writing in the disciplines, all right? Now, the thing is that if all I do is that I test what they can do at the end, can we go to the next slide? If I only test what they can do at the end, then, Summative assessment does this. It can tell you the degree of skill that somebody has in doing an operation, the ability to use historical data, for example, to account for why we are a multicultural, multiracial society. You could do that. You can test that. What it does not do, it doesn't help learners to actually reach the level of proficiency. It tests if they have reached it, but it doesn't give them help to reach it. Okay? And so that is why one powerful argument for formative assessment is that it gives timely, useful feedback so that we don't complain that, you know, kids not critical thinkers and they're not problem solvers. We talk about that all the time. What we want to do is we want to help them to become critical thinkers and problem solvers. So to explore how we can get there, I'd like to pass you over to Sharon, who can continue the discussion.
Thanks, Krishna. So this is a big question. Is a high quality, equity-oriented educational system beyond us? Now, think about this. If I were your teacher, what would you expect from me? Perhaps you'd want to know that I value you enough to put real thought and effort into how I teach you. But how would you know that? Perhaps if I got to know you so that I can choose those teaching strategies that will engage you in meaningful learning. Or if I design activities and select resources that feed your curiosity and ignite your imagination. Or if I ask questions that draw on your experiences and interests to include you in the lesson. What about if I use real world scenarios that engage you in information gathering and problem solving and develop your critical and creative thinking and problem solving skills? What if I ask questions that stimulate your higher order thinking and help you create concept networks to develop your understanding of the world? Or if I create opportunities for you to exchange ideas with others to broaden your perspective? And what if I checked in with you regularly to find out if you're keeping up, what you're struggling with, and what kind of help you need? In other words, if I invest that time and effort in getting to know you and use that information to plan lessons that will engage your mind, body, and soul. In other words, if I use formative assessment to plan high quality learning experiences for you. But what about equity? Now, let's look at this picture. Some of you may have seen it before. And if we just look from above the fence, you might think that they're all seeing the match from the same vantage point. But let's look again. Those on the left were treated equally, but they didn't each have equal access to the match. Now, when we approach teaching and learning from an equality perspective, we treat all learners in the same way and overlook their individuality. We might assume that they are all equally literate and numerate, and that they have equal access to resources and learning opportunities. So we hold the same expectations of success for all of them. But if we've learned anything from this pandemic, is that learners don't have equal access to education. Remote education has tested the old normal, and it has shown us that it can't be business as usual, even if we delay in-person education. So adopting an equity perspective, like the diagram on your right, can create true equality. That's why it's important, teachers, that you get to know the learners in your classroom, and parents, that you get to know your children's friends and their family circumstances. You know, the outcomes of high-stakes exams, and that this has been said before, they're only meaningful if they lead to each learner having equitable access to education, to equalize their opportunities for success. So what can we do? Well, we must find out who needs support and what kind of support they need and how much of it, and do what we can to provide them with it. It's really the only way to level the playing field. So then, how does assessment support high quality, equity-oriented education? Well, the answer doesn't lie in the SEA, CSEC, and CAPE results, but in understanding how learners are progressing towards these exams. And as your teacher, I can know this if I ask you through formative assessment, which gives me real-time insight into how you are responding to my teaching. I can then use this information to adjust what I'm doing in the moment and even afterwards as I plan the next lessons. This shifts learning from the surface where rote learning exists to a much deeper level where understanding resides. An equity perspective is what will push me to use formative assessment outcomes to create high quality learning experiences for each of you in my classroom. But what about those learners who have fallen behind since March 2020? What lessons have we learned from the pandemic that we could take into the future? Well, technology might hold the key, both inside and outside the classroom. Right now, most of us are using technology to teach inside the classroom, and many of us are using it to monitor learners' progress in the classroom as well. But more of us need to use technology to provide learners with meaningful feedback, even outside the classroom. For example, what about creating self-correcting online quizzes that can provide the desired response with an explanation? What about audiovisual explanations of complex concepts that can actually suggest ways students can improve? And these can be accessible anytime, anywhere, indefinitely, and even to parents who can offer that support at home. But of course, technology takes us back to this equity and equality debate. So we leave you with these ideas as we all ponder the way forward for education recovery in Trinidad and Tobago. Thanks for your attention, and I now hand you back over to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jagannath and Dr. Stunarain Singh on for that discussion on moving forward and fostering that deep learning through equity-oriented formative assessment. I think some of the real examples you would have given, Dr. Jagannath, really had us thinking. You're seeing the chat going off as well. And so I'm sure now, as we move into our discussion, we are going to be hearing quite a bit from both of you as well as our other presenters. And so I think that's my cue to start us off with our discussion. And at this point, I do encourage you to put your questions in the chat. Some of you have been doing so we're going to start off with those. And we are going to engage our participants in a discussion on all the presentations this evening. So we're going to start off with Mrs. Nalini Ramsawak Jodha. Mrs. Jodha, we have a question that came in earlier on that asked for you to offer some comments on the standard of present math items for SEA.
Thank you very much. I'm going to answer this question very carefully. Okay, so I'm not going to comment and say, yes, they are instructionally sensitive or no. Instead, I want us to understand that if our items are more cognitively demanding, then they are more sensitive to instruction. Right? So if we look at the items on the SEA test, and if I may be permitted, Chair, there was also about commenting about items in the text. So we have items on the test, we have in the text our classroom items, we have items in these practice booklets. So the more demanding the item is, the more sensitive it will be to differences in cognitive activation during classroom instruction. So if we have similar ability students and our items are more instructionally sensitive, then it should be able to pick up differences in instruction. Are the items we have currently instructionally sensitive? Maybe some are, yes or no, but we need the research, right? We need the research on the item quality, and we need research also on student responses. So item response theory, differential item functioning gives us some quantitative ways to assess item quality and student responses. And we could also look at some qualitative feedback. However, the research needs to be carried out, right? So I wanted to bring to your attention today that we need more complex items, right? That promote and foster that deep level of thinking and processing. And we need to support that in the classroom formatively by helping our teachers to understand how to assist students to develop these thinking skills, which they can then apply back into their responses when they take the assessment. More importantly, or maybe equally importantly, is the fact that item writing, we need training for that. And so that in order to supply items, whether it be for the assessment, for the textbook, for practice booklets, we need to ensure that our item writers are trained and therefore will be better equipped to develop instructionally sensitive items. I hope that helps.
Definitely. I think you really honed in on the need for that training and to put a lot of measures in place to be able to present items that, as you said, foster that more complex thinking. And thinking about thinking, I wanted to ask a question to Miss Tracy Lucas. Miss Lucas, you spoke quite a bit about creativity, and we have a question here from a member of our audience who says, we know that there are many stakeholders who don't accept creativity in learning. How can we as teachers help others to embrace this?
Okay, so thank you for the question. I want to start off by saying that some theorists actually say that you can't really disentangle creativity from learning, because as we spoke about, learning is actually being able to think differently and apply it to novel situations. And most of the time when we look at the definition of creativity, or how many people define creativity, it has to do with creating something, whether it's something you can touch or think, like an idea, that is new and appropriate to the context, and usually towards some kind of goal, right? But what I would like to say about teachers embracing creativity, or anybody really in the education system, is that you see that word misconception that was used earlier, is that there seems to be a lot of misconception about what creativity means. So I would like to offer that perhaps reframing persons' understanding of creativity is really important. And so, for instance, most of the times when we start off conversations about creativity in schools, everybody thinks about 4 things automatically. I can't say everybody, most people. Drama, dance, music, art. Most people, once they say, I can't do creativity in the classroom, it's because they're thinking, I don't have no time to do no skits in no classroom, don't ask me nothing, right? So what I would like to remind persons is that creativity, there are several ways to look at creativity. So we can look at it as a process, as a thinking process. And in this way, when you do that, you kind of break it down into its components. So teachers can say, okay, well, how can I encourage creativity in my class? I can ask my students more questions. I can give them enough time to give me an answer without giving them the answer first. I can entertain some of the more interesting answers that they give, even if they're wrong. So I can encourage conversations that allow them to think divergently and come up with many different answers. But also important to creativity is being able to hone in on one particular like best solution, right? So we could also encourage creative personalities, encourage your students to be open-minded, to take risks, to be open to trying new things. We can encourage creativity in products. What do the things that you make look like? Are they new? Are they different? And in terms of creativity and the environment, we also have to encourage that space, psychologically, emotionally, and academically, that encourage those creative processes. So by reframing how we look at creativity as beyond the arts, then I think it would be easier, a little bit easier for teachers to embrace it.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive response, Ms. Lucas. And it really makes us think about putting into action, you know, some of what you would have mentioned and other presenters would have mentioned about fostering those creative skills, and not only creative skills, but the collaboration and all the other C's that we would have discussed in Monday's webinar as well as today. And so I think this next question really should be targeted to the practitioners. And so I would like to invite the panel members who would have worked alongside Professor Delisle and Dr. Kronberg. We have a question that comes from the audience asking about, well, two actually, that look at the implementation of the model of the FSI model in the primary school system. They'd like to find out if there's any information on that or how it can be implemented.
Thank you for that question. That is a fantastic question. And primary school is a little easier to implement the model because there's one teacher teaching all the different subjects, so it lends easier to integration. I could give you a wonderful example that a student gave an assignment for her report, for his report. He taught English, that was the subject he focused on for his assignment. And he asked students to create a board game for the standard 3 class. So the students were in standard 5 preparing for SEA, and he used it as a way to get them to think about grammar and the structure of language. And so he presented it as a promotion. A board game company wanted to get into educational games, and they wanted a game for the standard 3 level. And so he proposed that as his performance assessment, where students had to come up with their own original board game or any kind of game that would help standard 3 students learn English, but it didn't only involve English. So it involved art because they had to design, it involved math because they had to figure out how to do boxes, etc. It involved technology skills because although it was a board game, he taught this subject while online. So students had to figure out how to make that game on a PowerPoint slide or other ways that they could show it that students could interact with it. So for primary school, because of the one subject teacher, it lends itself, the model lends itself well to the primary school environment.
Thank you, Dr. Kronberg. Any other contributions from your panel members? I do have another question, and I think this one should go to Professor Delisle because there's a lot of interest in learning about this FSI model. And so we have persons who want to find out a little bit more about it, where they can learn, where they can come to study, you know, about the model, if there's a website to visit.
There is a there is a website, hopefully still up, and the course which Dr. Kronberg now teaches, which is called EDME 6006. Unfortunately, it's a postgraduate course, but that will have examples as well as the model. But we'll put it somewhere else if people are interested. We'll put it on the general website. Give us about a month or so for that. But if you need it now, you can go up to that website, which is bureauofdelisle.org. Look for the course, EDME 6006, and you're going to see it there. Just to go back to that question, though, yes, the FSI is designed for the PCR. The PCR is integrated. The integrated toolkit is integrated. So you can create lessons straight from the integrated toolkit. It was meant for that. It was meant to solve the issues that were created. So the people, the women that you see are so great because they are so bright. Having worked with them now for 3 years, Patricia's the latest one. I didn't select them. They were selected based on the quality of their assignments. My colleague Sean and said, and he brought the assignments and the people to me, and we organized, we went Kansas, and we did a presentation fine. But they are very, very bright. And so they were able to translate and understand and continue working, and we need to hear their voices. So just tell us anything, one or two of you, please, on the FSI model.
Good evening again, everyone. The success of I think it's important to recognize that a one-shot implementation of the FSI model is not a panacea for all your teaching and learning challenges in class. It comes a lot with trial and error, because as much as it is meant to be, say, a benefit for the students, is also important for you as a teacher or myself as a teacher to be reflective. Because I would admit, I have implemented projects before, throughout the process, I'm like, okay, this is not going as I would like it to go. And over time, I have refined, I have tried different things. It's important also to take risk, as I would have mentioned when I proposed to the students that they were going to do this website or design this web page. I mean, everybody's like, it's too intellectually challenging. Them trained can't do that. It's too difficult. I'm like, leave them. It's not the objective is not to be perfect. The objective is for them to basically wean themselves off of me. So I would have focused on that aspect of the model in terms of, empowering them in terms of, relying on themselves and having that confidence in terms of their own abilities. So I would recommend as educator for someone perhaps who is now working or intend to work with the FSI model, don't be too difficult on yourself. It comes with trial and error. Rely on your colleagues as well, because I still rely. I might call Pat from 10 and say, Pat, give me some ideas on what to think about what I should do. So have faith in yourself, be prepared to take risk, and and interact and collaborate with your students. I mean, that's the best advice that I can give.
Hi. Oh, that's true. One of the things that was kind of difficult for me, and I'm now getting a handle on it, was feedback, because with literature and with English, you want students to reach a particular level. So you have to know what to say to help them, fill in the blanks, to help them shade meaning for themselves, to help them recalibrate, to help them, know what questions to ask. You need to know, you can't just say, well, it was good, but you could do better. You have to give them that descriptive feedback, and to really make it formative, feedback is everything. Feedback is what makes that child get, from 14 to 27 out of 30. Feedback is what is going to, level the playing field, as you would say, make that child who is not as, bright or whatever, as we say, teachers, make that child feel confident, because when they know where they're going and they know that they can do it, they do it. And it's just a wonderful experience seeing learners, who are like fledgling, just blossom. And it really is not a one hit, kind of event. It takes time, and it takes work, and it takes a lot of reflection as a teacher. And we have to get into that practice in Trinidad. Let's be reflective and reflexive practitioners. Thank you.
Okay, I would also like to chime in with my two colleagues and reinforce everything they have said. And I would also like to say that it takes a lot of planning. You cannot just step into the class and do it. It must be designed with a purpose, and you must be willing to take risks, and you must be able to foresee certain challenges and try to plan ahead and accommodate for them. And also, I'd also like to add that you should know your students, because I would have tried The first time I tried the FSI model, I did the exact thing in another year group and it didn't work out that way. So as Nicola was saying, trial and error, you have to forgive yourself and allow yourself to fail and learn from your mistakes. So knowing your students, as Dr. Jagannath was talking about a few moments ago, is really important to be able to think of a proper design, because remember, this is not about you, this is about the students. So you need to be able to find them where they are and plan around them. So give it a go.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And so really you could see the passion in their voice. Well, you could hear the passion in their voices when they speak about the actual implementation of the model. And so we're seeing the benefit of it for those who would have started implementing it. Dr. Harry, I have a question coming from a member of our listening audience who asked about being progressive. So the person asked, how are we to be progressive when the student-teacher ratio is sometimes 39:1? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So that, we know that teaching large classes has become a reality for most teachers, right? And as such, we resort and we continue in that traditional didactic approach. However, as we saw, the three examples, and I know those schools and I know those classes are large, and they were able to implement the FSI model. How? First of all, they spoke about time, they spoke about planning, they spoke about being purposeful. And of course, part of that would be how you arrange the class. You could divide the class into teams and groups. More importantly, of course, we have to look at this shift that Professor Jerome Delay spoke about, very, very important, about teacher change, and what is needed to help teachers change. And we spoke about, the professional learning communities, where teachers engage in PLCs, in terms of their own school and of course within a cluster. And that very issue that the teacher unearthed, could be a part of that professional learning community where, they would meet and cater to what they think will help them become even more effective. When you have to make that shift to include student-centered learning and formative assessment, that require a lot of time, but very, very, you can do it because many countries as well, as Professor Delay indicated in a previous Africa, they have done it and they have worked in terms of teams and groups, as I stated. And of course, other strategies, you allow students to share in decision making. You give up that need for total and ultimate control. You give them a chance to take charge of activities. And I'm sure all three, that would have happened with Nicola, Mark, Patricia, Claxton, and Ms. Buffett, and they could probably add to what I'm saying, and allow them to share in decision making in the classroom. And you believe as teachers in students' capacities to lead as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Harry. And I see our directors putting, placing some websites there to give a little bit of food for thought after this webinar closes off. I do have a question for Dr. Jagannath and Dr. Sunarayan Singh. I'm not sure who would like to take it. It's about engaging parents. Engaging parents in learning about the models to encourage their children to participate more in classroom activities. You all would have mentioned in your presentation the fact that if we are to move towards equity-oriented assessment, engagement is critical. Any comments on that? How can parents be engaged in the process?
Okay, so maybe I can go first and then Sharon can come in after. That's all right. So it's one of the strangest things that has happened. So my answer is comprised of two parts. First would be where, for example, Prof shared the his public webpage, which has resources about the model, so that on the kind of activity we engage in today, is, outreach from the university to the wider audience, the wider public. So that is one means where we attempt to make what is happening at university and is happening in research places in general readily and widely accessible to persons in the public, so that parents who have a vested interest, of course, in the success of children or their children can have access to this. It's free. So Professor Delisle's webpage, where he has this available, is an example that already exists, right? And it would then be a case of, well, making this perhaps more widely known amongst people, and that can be easily achieved. And we are, in fact, at the university, we are redesigning our webpage so that we can make our ideas and our research more accessible to the public. So that's the first part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, I know going to sound a bit strange, but we have always in education talked about this tripartite arrangement between schools, parents, and learners, right? And when we went fully into online mode, what happened was that the teacher and the classroom came into the home, so that you had, in some cases, and you still have, teacher is in the classroom teaching the student, and the parent who may be home is also in the same room. Now, for some teachers, that is an uncomfortable situation, because it means that the parent is listening to you and potentially judging or assessing your content and your delivery style and your classroom management and all of those things, right? So for a teacher who is not comfortable and confident in their pedagogy, that can be very off-putting and very uncomfortable. It can be very, offsetting. For others who are very, like our three panelists here, who are obviously experts in the model, but they became experts by making errors, right? They were not afraid to make errors. Having your classroom in somebody's house virtually could actually end up being extremely beneficial, because we always say, in Japan or wherever, they invite these parents to come in and they sit in the classroom and they watch the children. And sometimes, of course, it's an unintended consequences, because the parent will give the child a nod and say, why didn't you answer that question? We do have that, yes. But the fact is that the technology makes it also possible for the teacher to come into the classroom and have an audience that is appreciative. And if the parent is there, I mean, you know that the parents are there, you could say to them, you are welcome to be there. This is something I've always wanted for the last 20 years I've been teaching. I always wanted parents to see what a good teacher I am and how I engage my kids. So here I am in your classroom with all the technology I need. So if it is that we use what you saw in the panel there, you saw the degree of complexity, and you saw the beauty of it and how it works. And if it goes into people's home, broadcasted free 9 o'clock every morning, then there you go. So I think rather than being afraid and watching over your shoulder and wondering if people are judging you and judging your ability, if it is that some things need to be fixed, if it is that we need to become a little more proficient in some aspects, then we do that. But the fact is that online teaching is not going to go away anytime soon. It's always going to be part of how we go forward. And, I think we teachers need to embrace that and accept it for what it is, and accept that this is an excellent way of ensuring that the home, school, and learner can be embraced even closer. I don't know if Sharon wants to say anything further.
No, I think you covered it all, Krishna. I just wanted to put a little plug for the technology, that even after we go back to face-to-face teaching and learning, that we can still use the technology. And I know that some parents or some children don't have technology and the same access to technology in the home. But if parents still know that there is a space that they can go and read about the assessments that their children have done and see what the answers are, so they can help their children work through them. And using the technology opens that door for us. And I, like you, wish that parents would have sat in my class and looked at it. Maybe the children would have been better behaved. Thanks so much.
Thank you both for your comments. And it's true, I mean, we really, if we are to practice, truly practice everything that we have been learning and we have learned and we know is best practice, then we really ought not be afraid of having parents or caregivers, look into our classrooms and benefit from that experience as well. Thank you both for your contributions. Professor Delisle, we do have a question here in terms of some challenges with the PLCs, and I know that is something you and Dr. Harry are very passionate about. Some administrators do not yet see the need for PLCs in their schools. Is there any type of is there any way you both can suggest that, to overcome that for teachers who may want to engage in a PLC but may not be getting that administrative support?
Let me answer that. We need to get the roles right. You have a ministry and you have a university, and we must do our role. As you know, we must research and provide information, and the ministry must do its job. PLCs are not done by teachers. PLCs are a tool that comes from the top, and principals are trained, and they implement, at least that's what I know in the US, and they implement it in the school, and the district monitors it. So a teacher can't run a PLC without an administrator position. So that's what we're telling the ministry, that you can't say you have PLCs if you don't have a formal PLC program. And since we all have the net now, just go and check, and you'll see in Canada, the same New Brunswick that everybody run to and leave UWI and say do the course, they have PLCs, but the PLCs come from the policy document in the ministry. So the ministry has to have a PLC, not clinical supervision, a PLC program. I don't know how clearer we could be. And of course, when you go to the website, you will see videos of PLCs in operation in the US. And so please, everybody needs to do their role. And I saw also a question about the parents. Listen, as the article said in the Matrix, she didn't know where she was going, which we now know where. But wherever she's going, you have to go together. So if you're going forward in education, you have to go with parents. Parents are a major component and must become more integrated, especially now for the future as we build back better. Look out for that webinar.
Thank you very much, Professor Delisle. And so with that, I think we are going to bring our webinar to a close. And, we really can't close off without giving thanks to a lot of persons who would have assisted. So, we have a technical team working in the background. And I want to thank all of them who have assisted so ably over the last 2 days, and also the esteemed presenters from today as well as from Monday. Thank you. I think this two-part webinar really was an eye-opener for many. And the levels of engagement that we've seen and the number of participants that we have noted over the last 2 days really speaks to the value people are placing on assessment and a discourse on assessment. I want to thank all presenters for their contributions. And I think most importantly, I want to thank the audience, because without you, without your interest, without that desire to really interrogate and reflect on the system as it exists, we would not be here. And we thank you for your comments. We thank you for your very thought-provoking questions. I think all of us at the School of Ed, as well as the audience, you all would have benefited. We all benefited from this important conversation on equity-oriented assessment. And in the chat, I just wanted to let you know that apart from the links that you would have gotten from Professor Delisle, I see Ms. Lucas also placed some. there's a feedback link that you will get, and we do look forward to your feedback on this. It informs the types of discussions we want to have as we all navigate together, as I said earlier, hand in hand towards pushing our nation forward as best as we can. And today we're focusing on equity-oriented assessment. So we look forward to your feedback using the link that you would see in the chat. Yes, it's been posted by Dr. Alexander. So please click on that link, and please look out for more from us and follow us on Facebook. We're on Instagram, the UE, St. Augustine campus. All of our webinars are always hosted on our YouTube channel, so you can follow us there as well. So, you know, keep in contact with us. We love hearing from you, and we want this conversation to continue. So at this point, I wish you all a very safe evening, productive evening, and we hope that the conversation will continue. Thank you.